All right, students of ancient and medieval world history, let's talk about the readings from chapter 2 in your book that you're going to be checking out for this next coming week. So, what kind of things should you be looking for in these documents and in these readings? Well, as we get into the material, the main issue is thinking about what happens with the first cities. What kind of changes happen? What kind of changes happen in terms of relations between men and women? That was our big discussion, in the previous chapter. But what kind of changes happen in terms of social organization? What kind of changes happen in terms of the law? What kind of changes happen in terms of just anything you can think of? So the whole issue is the development of the first cities, more and more people living together in tighter spaces, and how does that change things? So that's the big issue that you're looking for. Now, in the process of doing the big issue, there's a thinking historically section in this particular chapter. There's one for every chapter. Don't ignore them. You'll be smarter for using them. And in this particular thinking historical section, it's all about being able to distinguish the difference between a primary source and a secondary source. And I've already been talking to you about that, so keep on working on it. Make sure you know what a primary source is, what a secondary source is, and then later on, we'll be able to talk about how to use them. So I want to go through a couple of the sources for you so that you understand more or less what the setup is and how to approach your readings. Now, if you check out the module page, it's got the readings set up so that on Tuesday you're dealing with the first 4 documents, and then Thursday we're dealing with the next 4 documents, okay? So we're going to split it up so that your reading is not too intense for any one particular day, but I'm probably just going to cover them all at once here in this quick video. The first document is a document by the editor of your book, right? It's by Kevin Riley. And it is a secondary source. And it is a source that looks at the urban revolution, and really spends time looking at Mesopotamia, okay, that's contemporary Iraq, and Egypt, and sets up a comparison about what are some of the similarities and some of the differences between the way society is structured in Mesopotamia and Egypt. So pay attention to that. And then furthermore, the article goes into looking at these are the kinds of things that happen as a result of the development of cities, as the result of the development of civilization, right? And I put civilization in quotes because we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So it's a fairly straightforward reading. So make sure that you have a clear idea about what he's making the argument is. These are all the changes that occur. Because all the rest of the readings, well, the next 6 of them, not the last one, are primary sources, either from Egypt or from Mesopotamia. And the idea behind all this is Kevin Riley tells you these are the changes you can expect to see. And then here is a source. Find the change, right? Okay, so the second source you're looking at is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Some of you guys may have come into contact with this before. This story is cool, and sometimes I get really bogged down in it because I love this story. It is the first written story that we have. And in the story, it is about what happens when the city and the civilized meet the barbarian. And then, of course, like any good story, there's a twist in terms of who's really the barbarian and who is civilized. So you only get segments of the story. That's all right. But what you're going to want to pay attention to is who is Gilgamesh and who is Enkidu and what is their relationship to one another. And then in the process of reading this story, we talked in a previous video about, what is history. You can use a historical method here and get all kinds of things out of this. So, for example, if you go into this thinking about, what does this tell me about the role of the first women? The first women in a written story in the history of the world. What are they doing? Who are they? It's pretty neat. What's their role? So on the one hand, you want to be looking at this in terms of like, what's the basic document about? And on the other hand, you want to kind of maybe be looking for something in terms of how does this document, tell me things about the urban revolution. Now the document's divvied up into two sections. You got this first part about the coming of Enkidu, and that gives us, basically the tale. Why does he come forth? What's his role? What's he supposed to do? What's the problem? And then you got this whole other part, the story of the flood. And if the story of the flood starts to sound familiar, it should sound familiar. Okay, the biblical story of the flood is based on this story of the flood. This story of the flood is much older. But clearly, as you go through and read it, it's like, oh, I see. But the whole thing is, what's the story of the flood? If you're familiar with the biblical story, you can play with the similarities and differences. If you're not familiar with the biblical story, you can just be, what's this story of the flood supposed to serve? What's the tale here? And what can we learn about it as a primary source? Okay, Epic of Gilgamesh coming out of Mesopotamia. We get this next document, the exaltation of Inanna, Ishtar. Okay, and the author of this text is maybe the earliest female we have in the historical record. And she's a poet, and she's also a priestess. So we have this interesting situation where we've got this prayer to Ishtar. What can we learn from a prayer in terms of it being a historical source? Like, what can you ask for? What might a god give you? What might a goddess want to hear? And what can we learn about the society that this prayer was developed in, reading this prayer? All right. So again, this stuff is not necessarily super duper straightforward, super duper easy. So read the Kevin Riley piece, take a break. Read the Epic of Gilgamesh piece, take a break. Read this piece, take a break, and take notes. All right. I'd like for you guys to have like at least a quarter of a page. You guys can probably do better than that on each of the sources, because remember, in the end, you are going to be asked to use these sources on your first formal essays. So you might as well read them now and take good notes and not have to go back and reread everything, because I remember there was something like that in there. All right, I'm going to keep moving with these documents. It's already a little longer than I expected it to be, but it seems important. Hammurabi's Code. Hammurabi's Code is a super cool document. It is the world's first legal document. And what can you learn about the earliest cities on the planet by looking at the law codes that the king of this city felt the need to declare? What kind of problems are they having if he's got to declare these things as law? So this is a read between the lines game. So play that game. It can be fun. That's what we're doing for Tuesday. So if you can get there for Tuesday, we'll be good. Now on Thursday, there's a little bit of a trick, right? Because you're studying for a map quiz at the same time. So just be ready for that. Thursday's documents, We start with this document number 5, A Tale of the Eloquent Peasant. This is an Egyptian document, and we don't have anything like a law code from the Egyptians. But we have this tale of a peasant who gets hosed by an official and is attempting to seek justice. So, what's the story? And if you and I were Egyptian peasants, what would be the moral of the story? How would the story make us feel? And then also, as historians in the 21st century, as we look through this story, what do we learn? What do we learn about Egypt? And then we also have these images from the Book of the Dead. We'll talk about these a little bit more in class, but you can check them out and just kind of get an idea of what's there. We've got this piece, an Assyrian law and palace decree. So treat it more or less the way you did Hammurabi's Code. What do we learn from this? We're going back to Mesopotamia. And then there's a final secondary source from the Smithsonian Magazine looking at a civilization in Peru that is, in the conversation for the first city in the New World. So trying to integrate the New World into this a little bit. It's an easier read, trying to integrate things in. So anyway, I hope this quick video has been useful to you in terms of thinking about some of the different ways for you to approach these particular readings. I'll try to come up with one every week if they're useful. One of the most important things that you could be doing is taking notes while you read and thinking about it while you read and being active with the reading. That will help a ton. Some of this reading is not going to stick if you read it while you're trying to watch the NBA game. Believe me, I've tried. All right. So that's all I got for right now. I'll see you in class.